Hello, my name is Ricardo Ramirez. I'm a librarian for the Sacramento Public Library. Welcome all to this wonderful evening, which is actually the grand opening for the Sacramento Public Library's Latino Heritage Series 2021. We're very, very excited. While everyone gets settled, I'd like to invite you to learn more about this, all of our great programs coming up as part of Sacramento Public Library's Latino Heritage Series. You can learn more at saclibrary.org/Latino Heritage. And there is a Spanish translation available at that link for all the series information. And at that link, you will have information that includes our next Authors Uncovered program event on October 6th with author, poet, artist, and educator Marcel Montoya, who will be in conversation with Sacramento's own Chico Gonzalez. We're very, very excited for that. You can buy a copy of the book, XLA Poets, which is published by one of our guests, at the local bookstore, Underground Books Sacramento in historic Oak Park. Please note that a portion of this evening will be presented in Spanish only. And when possible, we will add a summary of those notes into the chat. Just want to take one moment to thank our guests who are coming in from all parts of California to our wonderful Sacramento County and Sacramento region, which is historically known as a great, great literary hub of Latino, Mexican-American, and Chicano writers, poets, and artists. So to open up this series this year is a real pleasure with these three folks who represent a real dynamic range of all of those identities. So I'm pleased to welcome our guests. First, poet and librarian and founder of Hinchas Press, Yago Cura. Welcome, Yago. Next, we have poet and spoken word artist and California naturalist, Aideed Medina. Finally, we have Poeta Mexicana, Norma Beatriz Sanchez, who is a member of the renowned Escritores del Nuevo Sol and the Círculo de Poetas and Writers. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to all of our guests. I'm going to pass this over to Yago, who will go ahead and lead us for this wonderful evening. Thank you, Yago, and thank you all.
No, thank you. The honor is mine, Ricardo. Thank you to Sacramento Public Library for this very generous program. I'm so geeked to be here and so honored. And Ricardo is right. The poets that you see before you offer a wide range of Latinidad and what it means to be Latino. And the great news is that that definition is still evolving, and we're still trying to figure out what it means to be from so many different places and to be considered one people. And so this is why a program like this is so important. So thank you to SAC Public Library. You guys are champions of the written word. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Aideed and Betty. I am so honored to be sharing a stage with you guys. So, we thought it might be interesting to kind of talk a little bit about who we are and why we're here. And so if it's okay, Aideed, Betty, would you guys like to start, or how would you like to proceed?
Okay.
Okay. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. As Ricardo mentioned, my name is Yago Cura, and I'm a Latinx poet and librarian. My parents are Argentine immigrants, and they raised me in Miami, which is where I did my undergrad. I was very fortunate while studying English at FIU to study with Campbell McGrath, who at that time was just like starting to teach and really ignited a love of poetry in me. He said, hey, you might want to go to UMass to study with this cat, Martin Espada. And that's exactly what I did. I won a minority fellowship to go study there in 1999 and did study with Martin Espada, great professor and teacher. And from there, I went and taught some English. In 2007, I resigned and went to library school and learned enough HTML in library school to code Hinchas de Poesía, which was the online journal. We did 25 issues and started a press in 2016, which Ricardo mentions in the book that we just put out is called XLA Poets. but my journey as a publisher started with Puzzles for Foley. And it's a book that we published for American combat journalist James Foley, who was murdered by ISIS a little over, I think 6 years ago. And so that's really the start of how I get into publishing and stuff. And we're coming out with a book right now called Tlaquilix, Tongues in Quarantine, that are based on Sandy Rodriguez's paintings and talk a lot about the decimation of Tenochtitlan by Cortez in 1521. With that, if it's okay, Betty, can I go to you now and it is with the utmost honor and just geekiness that I present to you Betty Sanchez. Betty.
Sí, mi nombre es Betty Sánchez, yo soy originaria de Tepic, Nayarit, México. Llegué a este país en la adolescencia, fui una madre joven y dediqué muchos años a mis hijos, pero más tarde tuve la oportunidad de regresar a la escuela, de obtener mi diploma de preparatoria, después un título asociado de educación, de la educación temprana, desarrollo de la educación temprana y más tarde un título en sociología. No tengo formación académica en escritura creativa, pero la vida me ha enseñado a observar, la lectura me ha enseñado a escribir y mi obra es, digamos, soy una poeta amateur, no académica. Escribo por placer, pero recientemente me mudé al sur de California, pero mi formación como poeta, digamos que empezó en 2003, cuando tuve el privilegio de conocer a los escritores del Nuevo Sol en Sacramento. Gracias a ellos aprendí o sigo aprendiendo de ellos. Son mis mejores maestros. Tuve el privilegio de llamar amigo a Francisco X. Alarcón, a José Montoya y ahora Graciela Ramírez, Paula Ponte, Joan Anglin, Arturo Mantecón, Nancy de González, o todos los que forman parte de los escritores del Nuevo Sol. He aprendido de ellos, sigo aprendiendo de ellos. Son mis mejores maestros. Yo los conocí cuando estaban en progreso de publicar su primera antología y tuve el privilegio de publicar con ellos mi primer poema. Y ya publicamos una segunda antología en el aniversario número 20. Eso es un grupo que ha estado activo por muchos años, desde los años 90. Entonces, de ahí han salido buenos escritores y yo me considero privilegiada de ser parte de ellos.
Muchísimas gracias, Betty. Thank you so much. That's awesome. And let me just say one thing. I had the honor of hosting a reading down here, I think in 2017, before Francisco passed. And let me tell you, it was one of the most transformative experiences of my life. He was an amazing reader, amazing poet, and how amazing that you were able to work with him. I'm very jealous, and thank you for that. And then now we have Aideed Medina, and also super honored, geeked to be reading with Aideed. In terms of like work, person putting in work, she is everywhere. And so I'm gonna allow her to tell you about herself. Thank you, Aideed.
Thank you. So when we were getting ready for this, we sent out some questions so we could have our responses kind of ready on the tip of our tongue. And one of the things that people always ask me is, how do you say your name? Well, you say my name in Spanish, Aide. But nobody ever calls me Aide. Everybody calls me Aideed, unfortunately. And it has stuck, but it's Arabic, and I'm fascinated by languages and root words and where things come from. And my name, Aideed Medina, my first and last name are Arabic. And I just thought that was a little interesting tidbit to throw out there for the panel, just besides the fact that, yeah, I'm also, I'm a biologist. that's what I studied at university. But I've always been a writer, and unfortunately, I had some very discouraging events that happened through my youth, my formative years. But I've been writing all of my life. I learned English, the language of school here in the United States. I learned English in 1 month. I was born here. I was born here, but I didn't speak English at all when I went to school. My parents are from Guanajuato, and they came here. My grandparents came here with the Bracero program. Back in the very long history of the Bracero program, they came early on, both of them, maternal and paternal, and they brought us to the central coast of California. And so that's where I was born, in Salinas. And I lived in Castroville. And I always say, you got to know that Castroville is the capital of, the artichoke capital of the world. And you have to know these things about me because they make up a lot of my identity. I'm very tied to what has to do with agriculture and farm workers in the fields and all of that, because that's what my family was all about. And so that's why we came. And I started writing and reading English in 1 month in kindergarten. And so by the time I got to first and second grade, I was reading and writing like 2 grade levels ahead of my grade. And I unfortunately kept a journal. I didn't know it was a journal. It's just my words put together, stapled together. And one of my teacher, my second grade teacher, Mrs. Ashton, she found my journal and made it a whole day event to ridicule my writing. And almost killed the poet, I guess, but didn't quite do it. But, those things are scarring. And I think it's important to tell the story because it explains to people why someone like myself would have never even thought about pursuing formative education or higher education in regards to creative writing or poetry or literature, is because I got told repeatedly that I shouldn't even be involved in it. And so she used my writing to belittle me and ridicule me, and then kept me after class and told me that I should never think I'm better than her Anglo students because I was just a little wetback. And so from then on, I didn't write in school. Like if it was, my own writing, I kept it at home. I only did the minimum I had to do in school because it was very scary. I was a baby. I must have been like 7. And then when I was in 4th grade, believe it or not, I finally I got brave, right? 4th grader, I got brave. And we had a poetry contest. And of course I was writing. I had been writing forever. And I submitted a poem for the contest and I won. And my vice principal launched an investigation because he was convinced that I plagiarized. And he was not Anglo, he was not white, he was a Mexican American. But he was just could not accept that I had written this poem. So there goes, another second heavy lesson in how I'm perceived just because of who I am in comparison to what I was writing. And so it turned into a big deal, and my father had to threaten litigation for them to finally accept that I had written the poem. And my parents didn't even understand what they were talking about because he was throwing the word plagiarism around in English. And my parents were like, ¿te robaste un libro? ¿Qué es lo, how do you steal words? Like, like they understood maybe stealing food or candy because I'd be hungry, But it took them a moment until my father realized what they were accusing me of. Then my father was like, I'm going to get a lawyer and sue you for libel for what you're doing to my daughter. So I got to accept the prize for writing that poem. But again, it was like another big blow to my writing career. So just to make a long story short, you get to high school and I'm starting to feel a little more brave again. And we're talking to our counselor, signing up for college. And one of my advisors asked me, what are you going to major in? Are you going to college, Medina? I said, yes. What are you majoring in? Let me guess. English or history? Because that's what you Chicanos all major in. And I'm sitting there going, you know, just again, first generation. No one's ever been to college here in the United States from my family. I really don't know what he's doing is wrong. I don't know that what it's doing to me is wrong. And so I say, no, sir, I'm majoring in biology. And so here I am, natural sciences, biology, you know, that's what I studied. But I never gave up writing, and I kept it to myself for a long time. And then finally got published in Fresno State in the Chicano Writer and Artist Association Journal. But it took a lot of prompting and pushing from my friends because I didn't want to share my work in public, even though by then I knew why I felt the way I did and I could explain it to people. But it was very traumatic for me. Those little moments really formed me, but never stopped me writing. I write out of compulsion. I write on a daily basis. I write all of the time, and I share my work now. Now I'm not afraid to share my work anywhere. But like Betty says, you know, some of us are formed in academic circles, and some of us have, you know, write for pleasure, and some of us have to write or die. So I'm one of the later. I have to write or die. So that's who I am. You know, I've been writing forever, and I hope, and it's taken me wonderful places, and it's brought me to collaborate with wonderful people. And I wrote a blurb for your book on poetry, and I'm very honored that people invite me to, you know, write blurbs and give opinions on poetry, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful career as a writer, you know, from the moment where I got brave enough to share publicly again. And yeah, that's why I'm a writer, because I think I wrote down, you know, I've been in the resistance my whole life. You know, my existence is my resistance.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Thank you, Aideed, for sharing that. And, you know, it kind of dawned on me that another thing that really unites all Latinos is this survival instinct that we all have, because we've all been told in one shape, form, or another that we weren't good enough or smart enough or Anglo enough, even though we were born here. So that one always gets me. But I think, you know, your existence is your resistance is a beautiful sentiment. And thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing those experiences. I know it wasn't easy. And, you know, just for the people out there who don't know, this is very dangerous work. And poetry has this, you know, people think of poetry as this thing that the bourgeoisie only do. But my heroes have all decidedly not been bourgeoisie, and many have spent time in jail for their principles and their beliefs. And, you know, this poetry stuff is dangerous work if you do it right. So thank you, Aideed, for sharing that with us. I know it wasn't easy, and I'm sure we have a lot of us have those experiences, and it's horrible. As a teacher, I can tell you, and as a parent, it's never ever the sentiments that would drive an adult to say that to a child purely come from a place of spite and self-hate. So, you know, I'm so sorry, but thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and so our existence is our resistance, folks. And you know, let me move on to the next question. And this one is a little more just about what our work is about. And you know, the great thing about working on this panel is being able to hear what other people say about their writing, and then having to formulate what you feel about your own, which is sometimes very difficult, you know, because it's kind of like asking someone how they feel about breathing. Like Aideed says, this is a compulsion. We can't avoid it, or we can't help it. We have to do this. So it's kind of like asking someone, hey, how's that breathing going for you? So what is it that I write about? You know, I believe my work is about the many identities and the roles we exert. You know, like I am a father and a husband and a librarian and a poet and a publisher, and you know, all those identities have to intersect somewhere, right? I don't think reading poetry makes you smarter, but it's a wonderful medium because of the work it makes your brain do. So for me, it's also about like making my brain work because I have a lazy brain. I enjoy using startling juxtapositions to arrive at sly perspectives. And I enjoy making music with words at the expense of meaning. So like if something, like I really am bothered by the question, what does it mean? I really don't care what it means. It means what it says and what's on the page. Usually these days I'm willing to do most anything to annihilate meaning, you know, because of the severe limitations it places, right? Imagine if we only made things because they had meaning. Like it's a weird world, right? So, you know, I'm sorry if you're coming to poetry to find some meaning in these words. Hopefully I'm just gonna allow you to reflect and enjoy the music with the words that I string together. And also, you know, I think that poetry does help us to get at those like questions, the really good ones, the ones that give us the most mileage in life. And Betty, can you talk a little bit about what your work is about?
Bueno, mi trabajo es tan amplio como la vida misma. Igual puedo escribir acerca de una memoria o un evento que está sucediendo. Soy observadora de aves, fotógrafa. Cualquier imagen me provoca poemas, los crepúsculos del océano. No tengo una línea o un tema específico, aunque últimamente he estado escribiendo más acerca de la violencia de género, porque dentro de mi voz hay otras voces. Yo no represento a nadie, me represento a mí misma, hablo de lo que yo conozco, pero lo que veo, lo que escucho, esas otras voces salen a relucir y me compelen a escribir, sobre todo en lo que tiene que ver con la violencia de género, porque lo que le sucede a una persona nos sucede a todos. Entonces no puedo quedarme callada y es de lo que he estado escribiendo últimamente. Al principio, desde niña he escrito y eran en la adolescencia versos románticos y ya pasé esa etapa, aunque el amor nada tiene su mérito escribir acerca de él. Tuve un espacio donde escribí poemas eróticos por la influencia de una de mis compañeras en el grupo, Seila Henriksen. Entonces escribo de cualquier cosa que me está sucediendo en el momento. No tengo un tema específico, pero como dijo en alguna ocasión, escribió Francisco X. Alarcón, mis raíces, dijo él, las llevo siempre conmigo. Enrolladas me sirven de almohada. Entonces mis raíces van conmigo, escribo en español, nunca, aunque he vivido aquí la mayor parte de mi vida, el español es el lenguaje de mi corazón y ahí me quedé, ahí es donde me siento cómoda. Entonces por eso escribo y hablo en español para seguir difundiendo mi idioma.
Muchísimas gracias por compartir eso, Betty. Es toda una formación, ¿no? Todo toma tiempo and finally becoming the person that I set out to be, right? When I was a kid. So muchísimas gracias. Aideed, could you tell us a little bit about what your work is about and why and how your identity influences it?
So, you know, my process, it leans really heavily into flor y canto, which is it's a very ancient practice. And even though I didn't know that that's what I was doing when I was a child, when I was writing, as a very young kid, it really was that. My process is very tied to my emotions. I like to think of them like little still photographs of moments. You know, I take a moment. I'm not a painter, and I don't do visual art, so I paint pictures with words, and and I tend to capture very like actual segments of time in each poem. I used to say, oh, it's momentary poetry, you know, and I was hearing Betty talk about that too, that, you know, that her poems are about what's happening in her life. And my poems sometimes are what's happening at that very second, in that minute. Because of my work in the sciences and my love of biology and natural sciences in particular, studying natural history, you know, of California, more than anything else, I spend a lot of time out in nature, and not only out there doing actual exploration or hiking or experience, but when I say I spend time out there, I mean sometimes it's just a spiritual walk. It's a mind walk for me. Something draws me to a certain part of the land or a place, and I go there in my mind, and then I write. And flor y canto is that spiritual practice. It's very meditative, and it has served me well. Sometimes I like to go a lot. I like to spend a lot of time in this place called the UC Santa Cruz Arboretum. And I have been going there, and I went there specifically to find a white hummingbird. I read about a white hummingbird in the New York Times, and they said, oh, it's in UC Santa Cruz in a garden called the Arboretum. And I was like, ¿qué es eso? ¿Cómo se come? I'm from Salinas, but I had no idea what the hell an arboretum was, even though, again, I was a biologist y todo, ¿verdad? Pero I had no idea what an arboretum was. I only knew that there was a white hummingbird there, and to me, my soul was saying, you need to go there. Go find this white hummingbird. And so I went. I drove to Santa Cruz, and from Fresno, where I live, it's about a 3-hour drive with traffic. And I went to the Arboretum, and I walked there and had asked somebody, where has this bird been spotted? And it was a true white hummingbird, not an albino. So that even made it more special to me, right? And so they told me more or less where it was in the Australian garden. And so I walked right over there, came out into the clearing, and saw a white blur. And I thought, no way that I came and found this bird, that a very tiny little bird, this fast. And photographers that were there were telling me that they had spent 3 days there looking for this bird, and it was finally that, you know, on that day that they finally got to see it. So I felt kind of lucky, and those are the kinds of moments that will draw out the poetry for me. And I have to write about it right there and then. And I will stop whatever the hell I am doing. It does not matter. I will pull over on the freeway. You know, of course, I don't do dangerous things like try to write while I'm, you know, on text while I'm driving. Hell, no. But I will pull over. I will stop anything to write it, because I will lose it if I do not write it. And that is how my process is. So that part, you know, is very physical. I have to stop, give it intentional focus, give myself over completely to the feeling and the words. Sometimes I hear music, sometimes I see colors. It can get very intense. If it's something that that is heavier or violent or not good in some way, you know, by my standards or my values, it'll make me physically sick. But I believe that this process, that flor y canto, the way that I practice it, I believe that it is important. And for the longest time, I wouldn't tell anybody how I was writing. I didn't share how I wrote my poems. Again, like you said, you know, there's a lot of judgment and assumptions that are made to the value of your work if it is not following institutionalized practices. And nobody wants to go out there and say, hey, I was meditating and this poem came to me. You know, like nobody wants to say that, or nobody wants to say, I chased a white hummingbird into a bush, and then I was trapped there with the bird, and I had to write 6 poems about this bird. And now I've been going to Santa Cruz to this place for the last 5 years of my life on a regular basis. I mean, you know, people look at you and they're like, oh. So, you know, but I thought it was important to share that, especially if we're talking about the Chicano experience, the Latino experience, you know, all of our experiences as raza Mesoamericanos, you know, all of that we are, you know, like those things are important, and they're wonderful traditions and art that we have already been practicing for thousands of years. Our culture is not, our cultura is not a nouveau thing. You know, poetry is not new to us. This country didn't teach it to us. Shakespeare didn't give it to us. You know, we come from another line of tradition and poetry. And we have to listen to ourselves and allow ourselves to be that tradition and to be that cultura and to be that art and pour out in the way that is natural to us. And so that is my process. And so I write a lot about the land. I write a lot about earth itself, soil. I write a lot about it. I'm very tied to it. My writing is very seasonal. I can't even help it. You know, my writing is tied to the seasons. It's tied to the tides. It's tied to droughts and to, you know, water cycles and water bodies. And it is a part of the actual experience of living. It is all of that. I think of time in geological time. I wrote that, and the responses were organizing. I was like, you know, something that I had never really thought about was I look at things and I compare them or analyze them in geological time. And so when you do that, it gives you such a healthy perspective to understand that even mountains are not permanent. So how could borders that we imagine be anything to us in the soul, in our humanity, and what we really are? You know, so all of those things, they come out, they flow very naturally out of my work. And you can tell that I'm a daughter of farm workers, and you can tell that I'm a kid that grew up in the fresas and the lechuga, in the artichoke fields. You can tell that I'm a kid who walked on the beach all the time. I learned how to walk on the beach in Maslandi. You know, you can tell, you can see those things. My identity comes through clearly, loud. Esta es mexicana, esta es chicana, esta es más morena que el barro. This one is all that. You can tell it. You know, I would never presume to even try to hide it, you know. And obviously you can tell that I'm a biologist. Some of the nerdy crap that I write into my work, it comes out. You know, you can tell that I love Santa Cruz. You can tell that I love the Central Coast. You can tell that I love Fresno. You can tell that, you know, those things you can tell. So all of that.
Es muy evidente en tu trabajo, en tu forma de ser, Aideed, que realmente, you know, your poems are part and parcel of the landscape and of what California is. And I wanted to say that I completely agree with you. You know, we have this idea that modern poetry starts in this country only with T.S. Eliot. And I'm like, that's cute. That's really cute, because Vallejo was doing that crap a couple of years before in Montmartre, in Paris. You know what I mean? And so there's this idea that no, modernismo empieza con Eliot, and I'm completely against that. Vallejo is the one that brings us into the modern era in poetry. And you know what I mean? If you don't know that, then fine. I mean, you could say it's Eliot, but we disagree. And, you know, the other thing about the compulsion is, you know, William Carlos Williams, the good doctor, used to have a typewriter under his desk, and he would flip it in between patients. So this idea of you having this compulsion for poetry is, man, that's what it's really about, you know? So let's do this. It's 6:38 and I don't want to run too over. I actually want to get to the poems. Do you guys mind if we do round 3 a little later, or leave it to the end and we start? if it's okay, Aideed, do you mind if we start with you? Would that be too much, or would that be okay? Because man, you kind of amp me up. You amp me up. You're talking about these poems. I'm like, I want to hear these poems. Is that okay? Okay, okay. So
Vamos a empezar, pues, a lo que te traje, chucha. Okay. Savila, the healing plant, applied to the mind and heart, to ease the sting, to heal the wounds, to cure the disease. If only it could bring back the dead, the child washed ashore, the woman who bore him, the father who fled with him in his arms. We are all there, breathing in the salted air of the shore. Utter the word, say his name. Politicize it, sterilize it, put 1,000 spins on it, but leave our pain intact. We need it as much as we need to be healed. We have seen his face so many times, crossing deserts on foot, clutching onto rafts built of debris. We have seen him crouched in the shadows of walls built to keep him away from our tender sensibilities. But he was alive then, making it so much easier to turn from his face, staring out of white framed windows into perfect garden beds. Savila, the healing plant, cannot help us right now. So, and all of this, all of the injustice that is happening at the border right now with our Haitian brothers and sisters, you know, I had to read that poem that I wrote a few years ago in 2015, but I just thought, man, I wish those poems would stop being relevant. You know? This poem is called Sirena, and you know, I'm telling you something, I'm terrible with titles, by the way. No sirvo para titular poema. Right. Sirena. Getting to the bottom of the ocean is not easy. Any little girl who has ever pretended to be a mermaid could tell you that. It takes considerable work to touch the bottom of a pool. It takes more effort than just a wish to sit and reach and sit on the floor of the bay, surrounded by silence and fish, eyes wide open, just staring out into the expanse of the canyon, a few miles away from the kelp forest. To stand and walk along the bottom, taking care not to crush the many things that crawl in the sand. All of them are important. All of them. To lean over the edge of the carved out ocean floor. The canyon, dream, alone, beneath the water, dream, out of reach, peace, dream. I could fill my pockets with stones, tie stones to my hair. We drag nets along the canyon from a research vessel. I pulled up a metallic scaled midshipman, a beautiful fish from the mysterious place that I dream about and read about all of the time. It died on the deck in the afternoon sun. And one more, this one's called La Costura. Removing the stitching on a garment takes skill and patience. It is just as artful a craft as the sewing into a hem, a sleeve, a bodice. It is delicate work, but undeniably work. It is the precious delicacy that is required to unstitch hearts and skins from one another, deliberate and delicate, so as not to damage the integrity of the cloth, leaving it almost in pristine condition, ready with a few alterations to be fashioned into a new creation the next time. My hand passes over silk, smoothing out the imprinted creases that time has marked in the fabric, gently tugging it's applied to separate the pattern pieces. Each piece is folded into a coherent order in piles. Keep everything in order. Taking this leg from that leg, this arm from that back, this hand from that hip, this finger from that cheek, this breast from his chest, away from each other, soothed into cool silk segments, once more separated. Thank you.
Thank you, Aideed. That was phenomenal. Thank you so much. And like you were talking about, you did not disappoint. Thank you so much. That was phenomenal. We really appreciate it. Betty, ¿está bien? ¿Quieres seguir? ¿Podrías? ¿O is that okay?
Claro que sí.
Okay, es que we're on a roll, and I'm like, let's get this poetry, let's get this juguito just going already. Go ahead, Betty.
Solo un poema que resume por qué escribo. Sin saberlo, desde la niñez coleccioné palabras. Aprendí los engranajes del lenguaje. Y un día cualquiera, con la ondulación perfecta de las letras, construí algunos versos. Simples, sin pretensiones. Semejaban barquitos de papel navegando entre unas olas rotas. Descubrir la poesía me invistió de poder. Me dio la libertad de plasmar en papel la esencia de un momento, de atravesar distancia y calendarios, darle voz al silencio y otorgarle presencia a la ausencia. Con el vocabulario, aún estando lejos, puedo volver a casa. Escribo para transformar la ordinaria cotidianidad, para comulgar con el lector, y quizás en el fondo pretendo rescatar lo sublime de nuestra efímera existencia. Este poema lo escribí hoy, esta mañana, después de que los medios sociales estaban saturados de la desaparición de una chica, Gaby Petito. Entonces, en base a eso, resultó este poema. ¿Dónde estarán las desaparecidas? No las niñas blancas, cuya ausencia provoca búsquedas obsesivas, sin pautas ni descanso. Están en algún sitio, hay que encontrarlas. Gaby Petito fue localizada en 8 días. ¿Dónde estarán las desaparecidas? Las niñas de color cuya ausencia no causa furor en los medios. No hay despliegue de estrategias ni operativos para buscarlas. Solo un muro de inequidad, de silencio y apatía social. Ashley Lauren Heavy Runner, perdida desde el año 2017. ¿Dónde estarán las desaparecidas? Los millares de mujeres indígenas extraviadas en las montañas, en los ríos, en expedientes empolvados. Sus nombres se han acumulado como un montículo de hojas secas en el otoño. No se pone punto final a una oración en proceso. Están en algún sitio, hay que encontrarlas. Me duele. No es una, ni decenas, ni centenas, son miles. Este poema Redención lo escribí para una colaboración que estoy haciendo con Andrés Álvarez, un artista de Sacramento, donde vamos a tener un proyecto en enero de 2022, algo audiovisual con imágenes, poesía, voz. Entonces le pedí permiso para compartirlo con ustedes. Y tiene mucho que ver con la pandemia o lo que sucedió durante la pandemia. Día tras día, una repetición del anterior. infortunio colectivo que torna la esperanza en un eco lejano. Lo cotidiano en su totalidad ha desaparecido. Sin embargo, los pájaros continúan su vuelo sin inmutarse. Somos otros, aunque seamos los mismos. Nuestra imagen reflejada en múltiples pantallas, tan vulnerable, tan frágil como alas transparentes de libélula. Tras los muros de cristal suceden las estaciones. Confinados contemplamos la lluvia, los almendros en flor, las hojas secas. Las horas y la muerte se desplazan en silencio, implacables, provocando el distanciamiento de cuerpos y emociones. Este paréntesis absurdo nos obliga a vivir en el presente. ¿Dónde quedó la prisa, los planes, los horarios ocupados? Estiramos las noches por la amenaza de que no haya un mañana. En ese contexto ambiguo evocamos nuestro origen. Rescatamos los fragmentos de resiliencia acumulados para este momento. En esa pausa forzada desciframos la incógnita de la transformación y el equilibrio. Con los escombros construimos un espacio para refugiarnos. El arte, la poesía, esa hebra que nos silvana a los demás, el contrapunto de conexión, de comunión con la vida misma. Nos sumergimos en la tarea de crear desde la soledad, sin intento de trascender o inmortalizar una tragedia, sino para inventarle un final distinto de apertura y continuidad. Y ahora nos gustaría escucharte a ti, Yago.
Oh man, I'm so honored. Thank you, Betty. Eso fue excelente, la verdad. Thank you so much. Quería antes de terminar, hay 3 preguntas y quiero que todos los pensemos and then we can talk about them after I read 2 or 3 poems. So let me just read out the questions. So Nene is thinking about, you know, how does one get back into writing after a long dry spell? I know that's something that we've all experienced. I'm kind of going through one now. So please, if any suggestions or feedback would be great. Nene also wants to know where we draw our inspiration from. To be fair, I think we kind of went over that and we've talked about that at great length. So I think the getting back into writing after a long dry spell would be really, and then Paul Aponte wrote para todos, describe tus conexiones y amistades poéticas donde resides hoy. So like, you know, talk about your, you know, connections and friendships, right, that have been garnered through poetry, right? So it's just something to think about. And thank you very much. I'm gonna read a couple because we're at 6:51 now, and I definitely don't want to go over, and I want to respect everyone's time and say thank you for everyone for showing up. In a recent Harper's Magazine article, Home Country, What Does It Mean to Be Latino? Hector Tovar writes that our ancestors have escaped marching armies, coups, secret torture rooms, and the outrages of rural police forces. I've been working recently, looking a lot at the paintings of Sandy Rodriguez, who works, like Aideed was talking about, she gets pigments from the land, sources them, you know, and uses actual cochinillo, which is the insect that comes out of the tuna, to make dye, red dye, which is something that we've been doing for 1,000 years, right? So very, so this is called Calaveracópteros. Hovering skulls and bones over Veracruz and South LA, pero tinicitos, super pequencito. Rotor, Guido, Ratchet, Nat, Partisanos, flip the cumbia switches. Within, over the mission and Hialeah, the centrifuge, surface to air history in savage cavalry army mirage. Speakers descending from the fuselage over Spanish Harlem and Pilsen, orange bloated vapors of the sun's lucre, target acquisition nativist traditions, mini cumulonimbus chopper armada over Roxbury and Watts and Logan Barrio. Um, so my mom, when I was growing up, two of her heroes were Mercedes Sosa and Che Guevara. So that's the kind of household that I grew up in. This is an ode to Mercedes Sosa. Moms like to torture us with her folklore records, the contraband vinyl she amassed slinging discos at Broadway Records in Buenos Aires, 1969. Los chalchaleros, los nocheros, los grandes éxitos de Jorge Cafrune, and Mercedes Sosa records alongside Lou Reed's Transformer, Black Sabbath, and Creedence. I like to think my mother and Mercedes Sosa were going to retire together, two Tucumanas building schools in Nicaragua, heading up a Casco Azul battalion devoted to rescuing child slaves or adolescent prostitutes or albino HIV orphans, anything but Sosa's death in a Palermo hospital at the age of 74. Anything but my mother, a phlebotomist in a rude bloodmobile, the proud mother of two gringuitos born in Bensonhurst, but raised in the People's Republic of Miami. My sister and I would stuff our ears with brat wool as Gracias a la Vida or Alfonsina y el Mar jeered out from the speakers. We despised both ladies greatly, but only meditated on ways of giving moms aneurysms via ice grilling. Moms had to be stopped from making us listen to Sosa at ungodly decibels as if we were cosmic peasants or filthy industrialists with blood on our hands, or worse, deliberate serial buses of her musical affinities. We despised Mom's crazy, but respected her nostalgia. After several years of trying not to listen to Mercedes Sosa, La Negra's juju spreads over my crying throttle. And I imagine how lonely my mother, her sisters, that province, this account are at this moment. My mother, the ancient kami, and Mercedes Sosa, the world's guerrilla lyricist. Sosa with her vermilion poncho, her indigenous mask of skyscraper cheekbone, that voice that could lay the sea out, that diaphragm wisdom to spank the generals and dislodge the official memory. Moms in her bloodmobile, a stranger in a lab coat, tapping that vein, which is your ore, with a proboscis of fine, sharp metal. And thank you guys. So in that same article, and please, I recommend it. It's in, I think, 2 Harpers ago, and it's the title is Home Country, What Does It Mean to Be Latino? And Hector Tobar, one of our finest novelists in the country, regardless of whether he's Latino or not, drives across the country in an attempt to figure out what it means to be Latino. And he writes, the many English dictionaries I own tell me that the term Latino refers to a person who has roots in Latin America, descendants of more than a dozen countries and territories, Jews, Catholics, Muslims, and Mormons, right? And then this is the other one. In the 1995 Voices of Mexico, Elsa Rea Lopez writes that Tlacuilos were part official and part artisan. Their designs systematically and precisely combined figures, phonemes, and colors to represent oral language. The reason that I'm talking about Tlacuilos is because they were the scribes that described the decimation for us of Tenochtitlan. Without their really what they wrote, we would have very little clue as to what life was like before Cortés and his lying cavalcade showed up. So this is Tlacuilos. In Aztec glyphs, the symbol for painter, 2 diagonal scrolls in a rectangular frame. In a Mar Vista garage taller, a modest lecture hall on grinding cochineal to make eon-old red. In Nahuatl and Chilango slang, in Lunfardo from Buenos Aires and Spanglish from Los Angeles, in Lebanese Arabic and Maya, in Quechua and Zapotec, in the Long Beach Synagogue, or Pacoima taco shop, in poetry brothels constructed from bones of faith corporations, in groves of spoiled fruit, in training painters to be a class of sonic illustrators in the Calmecac, in holding 2 to 3 part-times in the hopes of adding up to 1 vocation, in attaining gifted witness status as compilers of their own demise from that treacherous campaign, Make Spain Great Again, in bloody field notes, in bullhorns and sirens of ruin, in appendages of institutes, in technocratic amate grammar, in future bark and shadow progenitors, in pre-Columbian body cams, in closed circuit storyboards, in classrooms, voluntold by friars to tap the story out. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to everyone. If it's okay with the panelists, do you mind if we're at 6:59? Do you think we could talk a little bit about process? Do you guys mind before we go? Aideed, Betty, would you guys like to start? And
Oh yeah, no problem. I have no problem going on. You gotta stop
Hasta que
me.
el cuerpo aguante.
A mí me
Bueno, hasta
para.
que la librería no lo permita.
Yeah. Yeah, so we were talking and you wanted to talk about, ¿qué? ¿Qué era lo que querías que contestáramos?
so, and then it had a great question, and she was like, how do you get back into writing after a long dry spell?
Betty, you want to go first?
Sí, bueno, como mencioné, yo recientemente me mudé al sur de California y me estoy reentrenando otra vez para escribir, para observar, para todo. El otro día fui con mi hija a la playa y colecciono piedritas y ya me traía una y me dijo, mamá, ya vives aquí, no necesitas recuerdos, estás interrumpiendo el ecosistema. Tiene razón, he tenido que entrenarme otra vez para muchas cosas, incluso para escribir. En mi práctica de observar a aves, tiene uno que estar uno quieto por al menos 20 minutos, observar, escuchar. Entonces puede uno tomar la foto que uno quiera o identificar al ave en cuestión. Entonces creo que eso es una buena práctica, estarse uno quieto y observar y llenarse uno de lo que hay alrededor, llenarse los sentidos, tocar, gustar, ver, oler. Eso a mí me inspira, estar afuera, la naturaleza, el océano, o en cualquier rincón, en cualquier espacio que estemos, pero tomarnos el tiempo, no ir deprisa, no. Yo soy fotógrafa y en ocasiones por querer tomar una buena foto me pierdo momentos. Ahora estoy tomando las cosas más despacio y creo que eso, hoy pude escribir un poema en unas horas porque me tomé ese tiempo para hacerlo. Entonces, solo eso, tomarse el tiempo y observar, creo que es una buena práctica para poder escribir y leer sobre todo, leer.
Thank you, Betty. That's great. That's great. That's great advice. That's like advice for someone who's been writing for a while, because it doesn't always come, the inspiration, and you have to be ready for when it does come. Imagine if we only wrote when we were inspired. Please. Aideed, what's your take?
Well, to elaborate, on Betty was saying, I was thinking that the whole time when she was talking. I recently took a workshop with La Maestra Naomi Quinones, who is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the topic of the workshop, along with other maestros that are incredible, like Juan Felipe Herrera. And they all were saying, first of all, when you're having a dry spell or a block, don't think of it as a block. Think of it as a rest. You are resting. You cannot swim the ocean continuously. You cannot fly the air forever. You must rest. The body must rest. The writing must rest. even the freaking inspiration that drives you to write this compulsive crap that I write, it must rest. And so if you start to look at it that way, that it's a rest, then it will slowly trickle back into you. And as Betty was saying, also take those moments where you cannot write to read those people that set you on flame. Like you read a book and you just want to write your own book because you're just so inspired, by this book, oh yeah, shameless plug. You're just so inspired by it. But it works. It's real. That really does happen. You reading Dreaming with Mariposas by Sonia Gutierrez recently. Oh my God. I read that book and I had and you can always tell when I like a book, you come to my house and you see how it sparks new work for me. I start writing in the book as it is inspired. It is pushing the writing out of me. And I'm writing in the book. So those two things, rest, look at it as a grace period. The universe is allowing you a moment to breathe, and then read other people who inspire you, who move you, read new things, read poets and writers you've never read before, because you will find new threads to write about. Yeah, so those are mine.
That's brilliant, Aideed. You're totally right. You're totally right. There is this idea again that poets are born, and that's a huge fallacy because we're made in the ink every day when you put it down on paper. Can I just say things that have worked for me is I am shameless, and writers steal, but they call it something else. They don't call it stealing. So what I would do is, honestly, if there's a poem that really blows your mind, I would take a line in that poem and put that as your first line. And then obviously give credit to the poet, right? But what I'm trying to tell you is a lot of the times there's a line that's going to spark that in you. And don't be afraid to use that. You know what I mean? That's, think about all the song lyrics, think about all the poems that have come from song lyrics and vice versa. And then Aideed and Betty are totally right. Guys, I don't actually get inspired by reading other people's poetry. What really inspires me to write poetry is nonfiction. Like I'll read something about quarks and like physics, and like my mind will just go into fireworks, and I'm just like, but it's not, it's not always like, it's not like I'll read, James Wright and be like, wow, this is great, I want to write something like this. I'll read something about, the burglar's guide to a city or something, and it talks about, air police, helicopters and what it looks like at night. And that's stuff that really kind of gets my brain going. So please, it's your right as a writer to steal other writers' lines as long as you give them credit. There's nothing wrong with that. And so please do that. That's a great one. And then let's see, we have another question. Can you talk a little bit about connections and friendships that have come as a result of writing? Can you talk about collaborations that have transpired, like completely as a surprise to you because we are wordsmiths, because we are trafficking in the word? Is there anything, any connections or friendships that are really just kind of blew you away?
Can I start? So I'll just start. I've been lucky. I have made many connections, too many to even name. But one of the ones that was really unsurprised. How can I say? It came out of nowhere, left field. It was the collaboration that I got to do with the Fresno Grand Opera, and it came by my friend and fellow poet and poet laureate of Fresno, one of the poet laureates of Fresno, Brian Medina. And because of me showing up to this slam mic that he hosts, becoming involved with him, that connection got me involved in this project, this amazing 2-year project to write libretto opera, which I had no idea what the hell that world was about, let me tell you, at all. So I learned, because we got to work with graduate musicians and professional musicians from the symphony, and professional opera singers and graduate students for 2 years, and worked on on art songs and art pieces. And the first time we wrote to music by Philip Glass with lyrics composed by Levine, one of the most amazing beat poets, right? And then, so that year we did our existing poems to their music that we chose, and then performed with the live symphony. You know, growing up on the east side of Salas playing with frogs in the lechuga fields, was I gonna think that I was gonna write libretto? And then we got to meet these opera producers and artists that came and talked to us about writing libretto. That was like the most surprising and amazing collaboration. And the second year, we got to compose original pieces with original music for a designated singer at Fresno State. And it also got sung by the professional opera singers and the live symphony. That is one of the best things ever. But those things only happen if you open yourself up and share. You have to share. But that is one of the most wonderful experiences I've had. But connections through poetry with tribal leaders in Southern California for mental health and indigenous mental health, connections with people in Mexico, connections with people that just I would have never had the opportunity to do if I was not being brave and sharing. You have to share your work. And that is how you get into those collaborations. And they have to be meaningful to you. Also, don't say yes to everything, but yeah, but those are the ones that are the dearest to my heart. Michelle Castillo, who I love in Southern California, the fight to protect Bloga, sacred site, and to be, all of those came from poetry collaborations, working with Juan Felipe Herrera, out of nowhere, those things are the kind of stuff that blows your mind and you don't expect, but it happened because I was brave enough to share my work. And that's all you got to do. Just tell people you exist.
Betty, how about you? Thank you, Aideed. That was an excellent answer. Thank you for sharing that. Honestly, thank you.
Bueno, para mí, mi mayor influencia han sido los escritores del Nuevo Sol y el Círculo de Poetas y Escritores, donde son miembros Lucha Corpi, Odilia Galván Rodríguez, Naomi Quiñones. Y ahora, a mí todos los miembros de mi grupo siguen siendo mi influencia, aunque no estoy físicamente con ellos, siempre estaré conectada a ellos. Y ellos me han abierto la oportunidad de conocer a innumerables poetas y de presentar mi poesía en diferentes revistas o recitales poéticos. Tuve el privilegio de presentar mi poesía en un congreso de escritores en Argentina, como mi compañera, ¿cuándo iba yo a imaginar que mi poesía iba a ir en Argentina? 2 de mis poemas se tradujeron al italiano y gracias al mundo virtual he podido conocer otras escritoras que físicamente no hubiera sido posible, de México, de Indira Cruz, que también nos abrió la puerta para conocer a Violeta Orozco en Nueva York, Maciel Montserrat Corona en Santana, y ellas nos han conectado a otras poetas y es un ciclo, es un círculo que sigue creciendo y que nos sigue animando a seguir escribiendo. Entonces, para mí, todas esas, aunque sean colaboraciones, aunque lea un poema, ya soy parte de este mundo poético y para mí es un honor. Ahora conocerte a ti, Yago, escuchar tus poemas de tu voz. Todos son experiencias que nos hacen crecer y que nos conectan a los demás, así que somos una familia.
Sí, la verdad, Betty, you're right. And I just want to reiterate what Aideed was saying too, and it's to be open to these things, because a lot of the times it's very hard. There's a lot of rejection in writing. I always tell writers, start a file with all your rejection letters, because you're going to get a couple, and if you don't get a couple, there's something wrong. Because there is a lot of rejection in this world, right, of writing. because not everyone is going to dig what you write, and that's totally fine. That's what personal preference comes into play. However, if you open yourself up to possibilities, if you stay kind in your heart, and because at first people may seem like they can't do anything for you, and then you'll be surprised what they can do, because they may be able to alentarte, to support you and inspire you in a way that you never thought possible. Let me just give you my thing. XLA Poets started out as a project where we were going to do a website for working women artists in Los Angeles who wanted to make a connection with libraries and become performing artists. So it started completely not as a book. It started as kind of like a public service that we wanted to do for artists, women artists, right? Working in LA, so that they can make some real money working as performers for libraries, okay? We're very lucky in California that we have so many library systems, especially in SoCal. For example, we have a city library and a county in LA. So just imagine that's 150 branches at your disposal, right? So, there's a lot there. So I just wanted to say that if it wasn't for that, I never would have put this book together. And then 3 years previous to that, I asked Lynn Thompson, who was not the poet laureate at the time, to come to my branch for a program. And her and Peter J. Harris, two African-American poets, without a doubt, said yes, came to my branch and talked about the history of South Los Angeles. If it wasn't for that event, I never would have met Lynn Thompson. I never would have asked her for some poems 2 months before the book came out, and we wouldn't be where we're at. So what Aideed is saying and what Betty are saying is totally spot on. Keep your heart open to the possibilities of people collaborating with you. Yes, there are some crappy people out there in the poetry world, and you will meet them, and that's fine. They can continue to be crappy, but you are a being of light. You are formed from millions of star years, and we were hurling through space right now on this rock, and we're going to make the best of it. And so keep your heart open to collaborations. Keep your heart open to things that you may not know about. Keep your ear to the ground. Be curious. Be in love with the world. And thank you so much for tuning in tonight. We really, really, really appreciate it. I don't want to cut it short, but it is 7:15 now. And I thought that, you know what, we might as well end with a bang, because this has been a fantastic experience. Thank you, Aideed, Betty, for making my dreams come true, to read with two gran poetas like yourselves. Thank you to Ricardo and Sacramento Public Library. Ricardo, would you like to say something before we go?
Yes. Wow, what an incredible evening. Thank you all. And yes, another dream come true for me, having met all of you in various locations and various parts of my life. To be here doing this together is so phenomenal. And thank you to everyone who's been here tonight, who's been listening, and who's tuning into the future, because that's the world we live in, right? For listening, right? This incredible poet, night of poetry and discussion with some incredible Chicano, Latino, La Chicana, Mexican poets here, flourishing here in California, which Sacramento Public Library is so incredibly grateful to be a part of. So thank you all. I want to just remind you, don't forget the next Authors Uncovered program, which is a mere 2 weeks away on October 6th at 6 p.m. with another round of incredible authors and writers and poets and artists. Marcel Montoya, from the legendary Montoya family, will be here in discussion with Chico Gonzalez, a Sacramento legend. So thank you all. Thank you, Sacramento Public Library, on behalf of all of us. So grateful for you, and have a great night, and be safe, everyone.
Gracias a ti por invitarnos.
De nada, gracias.
Gracias, Ricardo. Gracias, Aideed. Gracias, Betty.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Thank
guys.
you. This was wonderful.